That was a wonderful surprise. That video, I think we have a patent on that now for the Aquinas 101. Fantastic. I have just a few informal things to say before I make my formal remarks, and we're sharing this moment of thanks. I think Father Dominic Legg and I are just so grateful to the CIC that we honestly could not express vocally and in enough words, rich with enough rich significations, the gratitude, the sense of fraternal care and kindness on the part of our brethren at the CIC, and just our gratitude to all of you for coming tonight. I can remember, I don't know if I can say this without getting upset, but I remember, I think it was in Mary Eberstadt's, she was here tonight, in her backyard. It might have been about 4 or 5 months before Father Arnie Panula died, and he was dying of cancer. And we were standing there talking. I mean, he's there gently talking to us as he's, knows he's going to die. And he said, with such joy and humility, he said, I am hoping that the Lord will give me the beatific vision so I can see God, if he will grant me that grace. And he said it with such joy and with such humility. It was, it's such a wonderful person. When I first started working with the CIC, it was as a young priest in Washington, where I had a career for 10 years before I went to Rome. And Father Arnie was so welcoming, and he and Mitch invited me to speak to the first ever series of the Leonine Scholars, Leonine Forum. I did it every year for 10 years. I had such an incredible experience of talking to young people in DC. I spoke about my books there. I had wonderful engagements with so many of the young people who were there present, and it was always an inspiration to me in my own priesthood. Father Charles has always been just a great friend and colleague, and I think the work that is being done, the earlier video that was a beautiful testimony to the work of the CIC, was like, the tip of the iceberg of the thousands of people whose lives are transformed by the work of this great organization. So one afternoon in Brooklyn, 2 senior Jewish rabbis, both old men, were sitting on a park bench talking. And one of them said to the other, I've been thinking about my life and how much I've done for the regional religious community and all the lifelong contributions I've made to society. And, finally I have to say to myself at the end of the day, what am I? Truly, I am nothing. And the second rabbi responded, and he said, I too, I've spent my life in service of our local community, and I've made my contributions. But as I look back over my life, I think, what am I? Truly, I am nothing. At that time, a 10-year-old Jewish boy wearing a yarmulke and tefillin was nearby playing, and he was hitting a ball with a stick. Overhearing the 2 men, he said aloud in turn, and I too, as I survey my life, I say, what am I? Truly, I am nothing. The first rabbi turned to the second rabbi, and he said, can you believe this kid? He's hardly 10 years old, and he already thinks he's nothing. As this clever story suggests, the rabbis know on some level they're not really nothing, but it suggests that they are only something effective because everything is given to them by God. And so in a more serious tone, we hear Catholic saints agree with the idea that may at first seem paradoxical. St. Catherine of Siena famously says in her dialogue, in the voice of God the Father, "Daughter, I am he who is, you are she who is not." And Teresa of Avila says, "We are the only hands that God has." If you put the two ideas together, we are given all we are from God, and we are given all we are to be something for God. So it's apt in this regard to note that the St. John Paul II Award for Evangelization this year has been given not to an individual, but to an organization, and we might honestly even say to a nascent movement. The Thomistic Institute is, after all, basically a communion of persons and a movement of persons committed to the study of the truth and the communication of the truth in the service of God and in the search for God. Behind this communion, this service, this search, there is the not entirely hidden presence of God, and indeed, I would think, of Christ. I am the truth, the way, and the life. Inspiring the TI, its leadership, its admirable personnel, the friars, the many lay and religious speakers who contribute to it, its incredibly generous benefactors, and above all, its student leaders and student participants. In all this, there is the manifestation of a shared love of the truth and a confidence in the truth. Even in the midst of the modern secular university, even in the midst of a society that seems increasingly disoriented or indifferent spiritually or intellectually. In fact, especially in such a context, there needs to be a vibrant and clear testimony to the reality of God, to the mystery of God, and to the dignity of the human person made in the image of God from conception to natural death, as well as a testimony to the mystery of the church, locus of salvation and sanctification, pillar and bulwark of the truth, not an institution that is defensive, but an institution that is illuminative, that can help heal us and guide us and lead us into deeper unity and love of others. This testimony is one conducted not only by way of assertion, but also by way of research and serious thought and disciplined argument, accompanied by the love of God and genuine worship and contemplation of God. We want our students to love God and contemplate God in the Eucharist, even as they also dispute and argue and think and research. This is something the Thomistic Institute does do in achieving a kind of synthetic habit of life and mind. Pope John Paul II, in a visit to our country, spoke in an unequivocal way to the Christians of our generation. "Dear young people of America," he said, "listen to his voice. Do not be afraid. Open your hearts to Christ. The deepest joy there is in life is the joy that comes from God and is found in Jesus Christ, the Son of God. He is the hope of the world." And it's also pertinent to recall what this great pontiff stated in his first encyclical, Redemptor Hominis, in the face of the atheistic regimes of the communist period. And it's a longer quote, but it's just so powerful. Please bear with me. He wrote the following: "Jesus Christ meets the man of every age, including our own, with the same words. You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. These words contain both a fundamental requirement and a warning. The requirement of an honest relationship with regard to truth as a condition for authentic freedom, and the warning to avoid every kind of illusory freedom, every superficial, unilateral freedom, every freedom that fails to enter into the whole truth about man and the world. Today also, even after 2,000 years, we see Christ as the one who brings man freedom based on truth, frees man from what curtails, diminishes, and as it were, breaks off this freedom at its root in man's soul, his heart, and his conscience. What a stupendous confirmation of this has been given and is still being given by those who, thanks to Christ and in Christ, have reached true freedom and have manifested it even in situations of external constraint. In the course of so many centuries, of so many generations, from the time of the apostles on, is it not Jesus Christ himself that has made an appearance at the side of people judged for the sake of the truth? And has he not gone to death with people condemned for the sake of the truth? Does he ever cease to be the continuous spokesman and advocate for the person who lives in spirit and in truth? I remember the day about 7 years ago when Father Dominic Legge and I had first conceived of the plan of creating a chapter of the Thomistic Institute specifically for young professionals and adults living in Washington, D.C. We'd already created a number of chapters in the Northeast. We had a first gathering for young professionals at the Brooklyn Pint near the Dominican House of Studies, and a former student chapter leader who had helped found our first chapter at Yale came to the lunch to help host it. This is a young person, now professor, named Daniel Gordon. And he was invited to welcome those present at the lunch. He stood up, and to our surprise, he said, "We are the Thomistic Institute, and this is what we do." And then he proceeded to explain the purpose of the TI and how it worked. And I think Father Legg and I felt a little like the two old rabbis. We were suddenly relative to a new generation, and we saw immediately the power of this form of this movement, that our students were themselves the principal protagonists of the endeavor. Today, by the way, Daniel's married, he has a child, he has a PhD from the University of Notre Dame in theology, and he's teaching as a young professor at Ave Maria University. He has 2 books in publication on the theology of Thomas Aquinas. None of that would have happened, I think he himself would say, if it hadn't been for the TI chapter at Yale. He is one of thousands of students, indeed we could really even say hundreds of thousands, who have been impacted by the TI, its on-campus and online presence, and the witness to the faith generated by the study of the thought of Thomas Aquinas and other great figures in the Catholic intellectual tradition.